Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Amy Niver from Rosen joins us for a discussion on the components of our starting line seed treatment for corn, along with starting line and starting line plus for soybeans. Amy talks about how these treatments protect the seeds from pests and diseases and how they work together to support strong emergence and early growth for high-yielding crops.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We have Lynn, Dylan, and Ben, and we have a very, very special guest, and I'll let Ben introduce her.
Yeah, so today we have Amy Niver with us. If you have watched Cup of Joe in the past, you probably recognize that name. Amy is the genius behind what we do with our seed treatments, and she is very, very influential in what we do, the decisions that we make, and the different actives that go into our seed treatment. So, Amy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good to be here.
And I might also mention that Amy works for a company called Rosen, and they're an independent chemical distributor, and they have an independent mindset and view, just like we do here. And so we have a really good mesh. You know, we're not looking only at one stable when it comes to what we want to put in our seed treatments. We look at every stable out there, and then we're always trying to improve, and that's what Amy brings to the table, the independent view and always trying to improve. And Amy, this year is kind of a strange year, a tale of two cities, you might say. We have areas that are extremely wet in our area, and we have areas that are extremely dry. And when it comes to seed treatment, those are a couple things we want to address somewhere as we're discussing seed treatment. And we also, we're going to start with corn first, primarily because there's nothing like what we have on our corn from any of the majors.
Amy, let's just discuss the foundation, the fungicide, insecticide. When we are looking at the 5 different fungicides and the insecticide that we have in the corn seed treatment, what sets our seed treatment apart from what you would traditionally get out of the majors?
One of the cool things about picking from different suppliers is we get the best rhizoctonia product on the market. We get the best insecticide on the market at whatever rate we want to use. And so we have very specifically put together active ingredients that work when it's really, really wet, but also have a lot of activity when it's dry. One of the things with some of the other newer chemistries that are out is they need water to solubilize and get into the seed. And we're using some older chemistries, which I really like. They're a little bit higher use rates, but they're very hygroscopic, meaning under dry conditions, nothing works better than them. So we've picked actives that are contacts and systemics and work under wet and dry, which is pretty unusual. Most just, you need some moisture to activate them.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest diseases that we fight year in and year out, and I think we have the potential to see it this year, is going to be Pythium. Talk about how we are attacking that problem from 2 different directions.
We threw the book at it because we have to, right? Because Pythium can come in and one day your cornfield is fine and you come back 2 days later and the whole thing's obliterated. And it is very manageable with a seed treatment, with the different modes of action we have on there that we've sourced from special places. We knock it out of the ballpark. Resistant Pythium, regular Pythium, doesn't matter. One of the other wonderful things about corn is the seed stays in the ground. So we can load that seed up with all the modes of action that we want, and it continues to have efficacy over time, whether you planted early or late. The seed sits in the ground for 2 weeks or it's coming up in 2 days, it's well protected with the active ingredients we have on there, staying on the seed and in that soil solution.
Yeah, and then that would add to the very next fungicide that we have on there. When we first jumped into the corn game with our PowerCore hybrids that we have, we were coming up with our seed treatment from like the different angles on what we wanted in there. And one of the things that you added, or that we talked about or discussed at the last minute, and we added it because we felt like it played a nice, it gave us a nice advantage, was the pyraxystrobin. Talk about why we have that in the treatment.
It's one of my favorite molecules. Most people know it as headline over the top, and it has this unique cold tolerance stress reduction thing that it does. They use it in fruits and veggies and herb production to prevent frostbite. And it really helps. It's a second mode of action on Pythium, so that you've got 3 modes of action in there, which is the only one in the market that has 3 modes of action on Pythium. But it helps the seed and the plant, especially when it's a baby, so that you don't get that purpling, so you don't get that cold stress. Here in Missouri, we had 2 nights of 10 degrees overnight. And so it may be warm and planting, but sometimes it still gets cold. And so we've seen dramatic visual differences, and it's such a unique molecule. It works on the seed just like it does over the top as a biostimulant.
Which leads us right into probably my favorite portion of what we have in our seed treatment is our biostimulant package that we have with the Tripidity. It was almost a no-brainer. Why do we use biostimulants? What makes up Tripidity that we use in both the corn and soybeans?
Because it works every time, which is the cool thing about it. The reason it works every time is because we combine a chemical message that the plant has to respond to, plus all of the nutrients and the fertility that the seed needs to respond to that chemical message. Where a lot of biostimulants create systemic acquired resistance, or they, stimulate root growth, or the biologicals that are around it. But this is a direct effect on the plant. It's no different than spraying a herbicide on a plant that it works on. It has to kill it, right? So the hormones that are in Tripidity have to activate it. And especially with corn, all of the plants get the same message and the same fertility at the same time. So it really helps limit the field variability that you can get with moisture, with nutrients, with pH, and it happens on the seed. So it happens faster than any fertility program that you have, any biologicals that you've added, any starter fertilizer, and you pick up days. You essentially get your corn out of the ground faster, days earlier, and more importantly, all at the same time. And it's a hard chemistry. It's that synthetic chemistry with amino acids and fertility components, food sources for native microflora. It's really a very strong mix that does all the right things in those first few weeks when you really need it the most, because a poor stand never improves. And so you really got to start it off right. And Tripidity does a great job of doing that. And I'll say one of the big differences about it is it's not a living organism. And almost everyone else, most of the majors, all the other seed companies are really getting into biological organisms on the seed, which do have their benefits, but they're highly variable because it's a living thing. And so Tripidity is not alive. It's a synthetic chemistry with nutrients, and the plant does what it's supposed to do every time.
Yeah, one of the ways that we first tested Tripidity when it was brought to our attention was doing flag tests. And I think we probably had 12 or 13 different flag tests, and whether it was a difference of 12 hours when we were setting our flags or 24 hours when we were going through and measuring, every single time we saw more plants on day 1 and 2 versus day 3 and 4, and that's how we measured getting the more even emergence every single time.
Yeah, it's a real simple test. We get, I think, up to 4 different colors, and every day a plant comes up, we mark it with a different color. So like Monday it might be the white flag, and Tuesday it might be the red flag, and then the yellow flag, and then the blue flag. So you'll see more white flags the first day. They came up and compared to the checks. So we've never been disappointed with Tripidity. It's a real game changer for us. I know I have farmers come to me and say Merschman corn comes out of the ground better than anything I've planted this spring. And that was last spring what they told me. So this spring we're still going through the process, but in general, we think it's a very important component because it pulls everything together with what we do with fungicides and with our insecticide.
Yeah, Amy said that we throw the book at it, and I think that's for getting an even stand and an even emergence between the fungicides, insecticides, the biostimulants. We're putting our best foot forward when it comes to getting that perfect stand, which leaves the last component in the mix, which would be Trinemco, which would be our nematicide portion for the corn. So that helps us a little bit further on into the season when we start having nematode issues. What is the reason that we pick Trinemco for part of our blend in the corn?
Trinemco is I think it's the bright shining star of seed treatments in this season that we're in. We've been growing corn and soybeans in soils for so many years now and putting so much fertility into them that the soils are not as healthy as they used to be. And so nematodes are just having a heyday, whether it's corn or soybeans, whether it's river bottom or it's peat, whatever organic matter you have, it doesn't matter. These nematodes are everywhere. And if you haven't picked up on the way we do things, I don't believe in single modes of action, and I really don't even like dual modes of action. I mean, you would never go out and try to manage your weeds with only 2 modes of action, and so we do the same thing with diseases. And Trinemco is multiple modes of action. It's the only nematicide on the market that uses a synthetic chemistry plus a biological. It works on the plant and on the nematodes, and it colonizes, and it uses the tripidity as a food source to really boost its consistency. We see a lot of visual results, whether it be corn or soybeans with Trinemco, and it's not a very specific mode of action. It's much more holistic, which makes it very effective.
Well, that pretty much wraps up what we have in corn. And this is not an inexpensive seed treatment package that we put on. And I think a lot of folks ask the question, is it treated? But they really don't know what it's treated with. And that's why we wanted to spend some time to talk about our corn seed treatment to show you how unique it is and how much better it is. And it's one of the advantages you have when you buy Merschman corn, that it comes standard, ready to go.
100%. So let's flip the page to the soybean side of things. You're going to hear a lot of the same messaging, I think, when we talk about the soybean seed treatment versus the corn side, because we are doing things with multiple modes of action. We are doing things with biostimulants on the base seed treatment here that we call starting line on our soybeans. So from the F&I standpoint, Amy, is there anything that is unique that you would like to hit on when we talk about our 4 fungicides and insecticide before we go to all of the bells and whistles that really make us unique?
The thing about soybeans is when they germinate, that seed comes up out of the ground. So whatever seed treatment you put on it, you have to make sure it's applied correctly. It gets into the seed coat and into the plant quickly, and all of it gets in there without being phytotoxic, without damaging it. So we've chosen very specific actives that will do that, designed for soybeans.
So Joe was talking about at the beginning of the episode here, we have areas that are wet, we have areas that are extremely dry. What are the different diseases that we fight in soybeans with the different conditions that we have that are in front of our growers today?
Well, the earlier you plant, you're always fighting sudden death, whether it's dry or wet or hot or cold, it doesn't matter. The earlier you plant, red crown rot, sudden death are always going to show up. And then the adage that, well, it's not wet, it's dry, there's no moisture, so I shouldn't get diseases. Also, we don't see it very often because we don't have these dry conditions in some places very often, but we call them junk fungi. They're penicillium and aspergillus. They're like bread molds that love dry conditions, and they just colonize those roots and they hang out until it gets wet, and then they just take off and rot the whole thing. It's really a problem with wheat too. So we're expecting some dry rot issues. So when you talk about seed treatments on soybeans, we used to say, well, I'm planting later, I don't need it, or it's dry, I don't need it. This is not the place, this is not the season to cut costs on the treatment, because that seed is so precious. We're putting down lower and lower seeding rates. You need every single seed to come out of the ground and be healthy and well established, especially with all the herbicides we're putting over the top of it as well. Seed treatments are one of the key things you can do to protect your seedlings.
Yeah, it's all about managing stress, right? Right, Amy? In other words, anything we can do to manage stress is a positive thing to make that plant healthier, and a healthier plant is a more productive plant. So we covered the fungicide piece. Now, what's next?
Well, I just wanted to hit with the wet conditions, the dry conditions. One of the reasons that we run with the imidacloprid is the solubility piece. We've talked about it before on Cup of Joe. Will you highlight the imidacloprid piece of why we use what we use in our seed treatment?
Yep, there's 3 different insecticides that you can use on soybeans, and there's a spectrum of solubility, meaning one, you get a little bit of moisture on it and it gets into the plant really fast, but if it gets 3 inches of rain over 2 weeks, it washes away easier. And then on the other end, you've got one where if it's really dry, it won't get into the plant at all, and you're not hardly getting any efficacy. And the one that's in the middle, imidacloprid, some people know it as gaucho, that's the one that we use. So whether it's hot or dry, you're getting the best of both worlds, that middle of the road, the best coverage you can ask for with an insecticide getting into the seedling.
Yeah, it's made a huge difference. I've even seen where guys will go out planting fairly late in the game and they can get their stands absolutely decimated with thinking that it's late enough in the year they don't need to use a seed treatment. Seed corn maggot, wireworm, things of those nature can wipe out a stand, and all that they would have had to do is spend a little bit of money on the seed treatment, and they wouldn't have had to go back out and replant. So the insecticide, as mundane as it seems, the insecticide can be important early planting and late planted. Now we kind of get on to something that's different from the corn perspective, is the biologicals and the different components that direction. We have 2 of them, systemically acquired resistant products. Can you kind of explain what SARs are and how they work in the plant?
Sure. SAR it's the big thing that everyone says with biologicals, and it stands for systemic acquired resistance, meaning the plant is exposed to some substance. It's either a chemical like what we apply, or there's a bacteria that produces a chemical that causes it. And it tells the plant to turn its defenses on. So it's basically putting on armor for, sometimes it's very specific diseases. Sometimes it's for stress. Sometimes it's for insects. Each chemical does a different thing. And so we've chosen to use one that is a synthetic chemistry. So it works every time. The plant has no choice but to respond to it, to do what we're asking it to do. And it puts on an armor that prevents fungi from getting into the cells so easily.
Yeah, so break that down, because we have both spectrums of that. We have broad control and we have super narrow tight control. I would say that the heads up would be our super tight control for one specific pest, and then the chitosan side of things is a little bit more broad spectrum. Can you break out what the difference between those 2 are and what we're trying to attack?
Yeah, so the really tight control with the heads up, it produces a very specific enzyme. It makes the plant produce an enzyme that goes after how white mold infects the plant. So it's a very specific mode of action. Other fungi also use that mode of action, but those fungi have alternatives. They have alternative ways to do it. So it's very specific for sclerotinias, for white molds, but it also works on Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium. So it's a 4th and 5th mode of action on some of those things working on the plant. And the cool thing about it working on the plant is it doesn't disappear in 2 to 3 weeks like a chemistry does. It really, once those genes are turned on in the plant, they stick around in actively growing tissue. So it can be very robust, particularly for later season infections like when white mold comes in.
Well, since it's a biological, Amy, how is it delivered on the seed, and how does it stay viable, up until planting time?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Joe. The word biological, everyone interprets that as their own thing. So some people say that a biological, I'm a little old school. And so if you say biological, I think it's alive. But the new school of people, when they say biological, to them, it means it came from a living organism and it's not a synthetic chemistry. So while we call like Tribitidia biological because the amino acids and the hormones came from living things, while we call heads up biological because it came from Chenopodium quinoa. If you're a weed scientist, you recognize your lamb's quarters there. It came from a living organism. It's not actually alive. So it's super stable on the seed, and it has the same lifespan as any other synthetic chemistry.
That is fairly similar to the chitosan side of things, right, Amy?
Yes, exactly. And so chitosan comes from chitin after an enzyme, chitinase, has dissolved it. And so there's a lot of hubbub in the industry about those three molecules, the chitin, chitinase, and chitosan. And what we've put on there is the chitosan, which is the active molecule. That is what is actually working on the plant. We've basically short-circuited the system and processed everything so it's in the form that the plant most easily recognizes. And that turns on all the armor for thickened cell walls in general. So it's not producing an enzyme for a certain type of fungi. It's just making the cell walls thicker, which makes it more difficult for anything to penetrate. So whether that's a nematode or an insect or any fungi or plasmodium or whatever decides it wants to feed on the plant that day, it's got a little bit thicker skin, which really helps it tolerate these infestations better.
You know, if you Google chitosan, it just lights up with all the data and all the information about that particular product. And but I think what's unique is the form of chitosan we use too. It's talk about that just for a second.
Yes, we've known chitosan works in the plant pathology entomology word for decades. I mean, there's tons and tons of literature on it. The problem is it's very difficult to formulate because it chelates, meaning it really likes to make friends in a liquid. And we're talking teeny, teeny, tiny amounts, and it gets attached to other things and turns into crystals and turns back into chitin, and it's just a mess, right? It's like crushed up crab shells trying to go through your sprayer. So as an over the top, it's always been really difficult. And we've worked with our supplier, and they've come up with a very specific molecular weight and that type of what else goes in the formulation to keep it stable. And specifically for starting line, we've made sure we've kept it stable. And it was a new thing that we kind of stumbled upon the solution. We've been working on it for years, and it's now we're able to get it on the seed consistently. We've broadacre used it. It's very user friendly now. And it's very, very synergistic with the Victratos, with the Trunemcos of the world, the Ilevos even. It really helps boost the plant to be able to do what it's supposed to do better.
So Amy, that brings us to another question. One of the things that you've taught us over the years is, you know, the active is important, but the formulation is even more important or just as important because, you know, in our seed treating process, you know, we want it to stick to the seed. We don't want it to stick to the mix tank or to the seed treater or to the belt or to the bins. We want to deliver it to the farmer. So talk a little bit about formulations.
Yep, that's always been my other big thing I get excited about with seed treatments is they're not all created equal, and over the top formulations are very different than on seed ones, especially on soybeans, because the cotyledons of the soybean seed are so close to the surface. They're very sensitive to things like surfactants and solvents. And so how you grind up the flowables, the crystals that goes in there, how you store it, oftentimes it's not the active ingredient that's the issue, it's the inerts that are an issue. And so we spend a lot of time, how do we make sure it gets on the seed evenly? So while it would be nice to put 20 things on the seed, if the volume gets too high and doesn't adhere like it's supposed to, we're not doing anybody any good. And different combinations like the chitosan, you could put it with certain nutritionals or biological and it would kill it, or it would chelate out and not work. And so just as much as field efficacy, I spend that time on formulations.
Going back to the field efficacy, we highlighted what's all in Tripidity ST on the corn side of things, but I think it's even more important to highlight and talk about why the Tripidity is so important on the soybean side to make everything work better, because there are companies out there that may put chitosan on their seed, but it's just with an F&I. There's a lot of people that use Heads Up, but it's just with an F&I. How does Tripidity tie everything together?
It's the glue that holds everything together. And, we used to drill soybeans, right? Controlled spills. And we used to plant 180,000, 200,000 seeds. But now that our seeding rates are 140,000 seeds, as an example, this yield compensation thing we like to say about soybeans is not as magical as it used to be. So every plant is counting a whole lot more. And if you want the plant to do something, you give it instructions, you have to give it the tools it needs to do it. And that's what tripidity is. And no matter how fertile your soils are, what other things you have, if you're putting things in furrow, because you're putting it on the seed, you're getting rid of the limiting factors that might happen, because heads up requires energy for that plant to make an extra enzyme. Chitosan, it requires energy for that plant to make thicker cells. And that energy just doesn't come out of thin air. The plant has to go find it in the soil. And so we give it in a very digestible form. It's at the cellular level. I don't think we really understood as an industry how those first few days, how much energy is spent by the plant, the seed, just trying to find nutrients. So we give it nutrients before it even has to look for them. And that's really what gives it the head start. So any chemical messaging you give it, like a heads up or a chitosan, it says, okay, I can do this. This isn't going to stress me out anymore.
Essentially giving more consistent results, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
No, I think we looked at a lot of plants last year. It's really interesting to your point on lowering the population. When looking at some other things that were going on the first emerging soybeans, and you can go out and see just the diameter of the stem and what they're producing. I think it's really important to have that even emergence, because the ones that were beside it really got really wispy and thin, and they weren't producing as good. So, yeah, to your point, we give beans a little bit of a lack of credence to their emergence and the importance to that. But the high yielding soybeans that we saw, specifically one variety, which we all know which one that one is, but the difference in the emergence that then translated to the high end yield potential that bean had was all stemmed back to that emergence, and then the neighbors beside it were just they added to the pile, but they didn't contribute to a high yield level like the first emerged stuff.
So we got a lot of layers in there, and that brings us to the final component that sets us apart from a lot of other companies too, and that's the seed finisher. And as you put more, seed treatments for the most part, you correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but are solids, and then we have to put them into a liquid format and then get them on the seed. And so basically it's a little bit looking like a lot of bumps around that seed, and the flowability, and farmers want everything to work perfectly. And when you get a lot of seed treatment material on the seed, it can flow differently than untreated seed. So we add a last component to make a difference on our baseline seed treatment as well as our starting line plus. So talk about that.
Yeah, we found a sticker that doesn't stick. Basically, you always ask me, can you make stuff that sticks to the seed but nothing else? And I pretty much told you that was a pipe dream, right? Well, technology has proved us wrong, and we have a supplier that we work with where you actually have to put a little bit of water in this formulation to activate it, and then it sticks everything to the seed and helps that seed to seed coverage when you're treating without building up on equipment. And then it just locks it in there, and so it's real slick and just goes right through the planter and keeps everything where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, our plantability is just about, but not quite as good as planting non-treated seed. I mean, it really makes a difference. And that's an important part of the whole package. Again, it costs money to do that, but we feel that when farmers can say that, I set my planter and it planted correctly, that's important to us too. So the next and highest level of seed treatment we have is starting line plus. So we just take all those things we just talked about, and then we make it even better with starting line plus, which is an optional seed treatment from Merschman seeds, and makes up a pretty big chunk of our business because farmers value what we add on additional. So let's talk about what we add on to starting line to make it starting line plus.
We pick the top tier stuff picked Victrato and Trunemco. So like I always say, there's no such thing as no disease. And it used to be, well, I get SDS in this field, so I'll use something special here. Or maybe I have some nematodes, so I'll use it over here. We're getting pretty ubiquitous that every year at some level, you're going to have those pests. And now red crown rot has come around and Victrato really smokes it in the field. I mean, it's really been a phenomenal game changer for those of us who experience it. It was a tool we really needed. And so it's been an upgrade to some of the other things that were already available on the market. With this Starting Line Plus, you take away the risk where you sit there and you say, well, if the moisture comes, I'm going to get SDS. Or I planted in April, so I know the SDS is there. You plant in early May and you know that it's there. And with the Trunemco on there, with the nematodes, they're also everywhere, whether you think they're a problem or not. Remember, they only move about 1 inch in the soil. I've learned the plant actually grows to the nematodes. So soil testing can be very misleading sometimes. But if you test your soil and you've got any kind of nematode at all, there's something you need to manage for. And this is really a good way because the Trunemco has modes of action on it, the Victrato does, and the Tripidity helps it all work better. So we're telling the plant to do more things, but we're also protecting it and feeding it.
So they do believe that there is a connection between nematodes and sudden death syndrome and even red crown rot. So anything we can do to lessen cyst nematode pressure is going to knock down those two diseases, which are becoming more and more prevalent every year and more, I would say, higher and higher yield reductions, particularly when you get a really major infestation. So that's why the Trunemco is so important in this combination with, again, the multiple modes of action with either Saltro or Victrato.
Yep, they say that if you have nematodes, it won't be long before the sudden death comes in. And we really don't understand the relationship with the two, but it's even in North Dakota, we're having sudden death and nematode issues. So it's here and it's here to stay. The big thing with nematodes is the number one symptom is yield loss. So these microscopic worms you're not going to see. You're not going to see symptomology on your plants. You're not going to be able to pull a plant up in the early spring and say, oh, I have nematodes. In the fall, you'll be able to find cysts, but really yield loss, yields that stick and won't budge is the leading symptom of nematodes, and that's how you know you have them.
Well, and if we look over the next hill or two, there might be another component that we'll be adding into our genetics called Nemosphere, which is a BT for nematodes. So we'll see how this all plays out with even another mode of action to control nematodes, which could help us in the area of sudden death and potentially red crown rot. So we're excited to see that product maybe a year from now in test fields. So time will tell. You know, Amy, when I graduated from college in it was 1977, January 1st, I came to work theoretically on the first day of 1977. My dad gave me a job by seed treatment. You know, it wasn't real hard. It was Captan, okay? You basically decided what, if you wanted to dry powder or if you wanted a liquid version, and it was Captan. And then when my dad started the business back in, with soybeans, and our first soybeans we sold, we treated them, but back then in 1957, it was with an inoculant. Things have really, really changed from one mode of action. I remember the Gufson people in the late 70s, they were talking about that seed treatment someday would look like the rings of Saturn. In other words, layer upon layer upon layer. And it's way beyond Saturn now, in my opinion, what we're doing for farmers. So we've come along so far with seed treatments. It's pretty exciting. And then, is there anything over the next hill that you're thinking about or looking at that could potentially impact seed treatment?
Biologicals, the technology is rapidly advancing. Some of of the regulations that have happened over in Europe have really advanced to that technology. There's more modes of action coming on nematodes. There's more modes of action coming on the water molds, the Pythiums and the Phytophtheras. There is herbicide tolerance, resistance type, like helping the plant tolerate herbicides better. Chemistries coming along. So those are all in development now.
So is there anything else we wanted to ask Amy about? A little sidebar with Amy. I mean, besides being our guru when it comes to seed treatments, she's also a mountain climber, so there's no obstacle she cannot overcome, I can tell you that, and whether it be in seed treatment or mountain climbing. So we really appreciate the opportunity to work with her and the Rosen company because of their independent view. I think that is the key thing in order to put together a package that is better than anything out there, is the independent view. We're looking at everything rather than just what comes out of a particular company. Anything else to ask Amy?
I just wanted to say, I think with everything we talked about, I think it's important why, everything we put in our seed treatment, why we still need treated seed even if it gets later in the season. It seems like we always get the phone calls where, we're into 1st of June, I still haven't planted, can I cheap out on something like that? But I think with our, our Tripidity or insecticides, even if it's our standard F&I, I really think we just talked about why it's so important, because we need every node when it comes to beans when it gets that late, especially if we can get every plant up and going that much faster. It's going to just help you in the long run when the combines go.
Yeah, I think this comment we get every year would make Amy's head spin, but we do get comments of you guys are doing too much on the seed coat, and you're kind of, my emergence is a little bit slower than when I had Clark 63 back when Shep was a pup, but part of the sorry, I'm old, I'm from Missouri. But part of the process is one of the comments that I like to make is, what if we're right? What if you're wrong? Can you afford financially to be wrong? Can you afford to have, what was it, Pythium a couple years ago, late season on some replant? Even the replant got hit by it. So, when you're doing the seed treatment analysis, the biggest thing is, maybe hypothetically, we're taking away some of the top end, if that's even a real thing. Amy maybe may or may not think that, but we're just forced with so many stresses that we have to play some element of defense, that we have to hit a triple once out of 9 years to hold back on not having a home run, because if we wouldn't have done that, it would have been a complete strikeout and you would have been left with no crop. So yeah, maybe hypothetically we take away the 150 bushel potential to be at 120, but it gives us an opportunity to not ever be at zero.
Amy, any comments about why you need seed treatment even in June compared to April?
A poor stand never improves, and it's the cheapest insurance you'll ever buy is your seed treatment. Just take the risk away. Instead of, you got to, as Randy Dowdy says, do you know that stand is going to come up? Or are you hoping you'll be fine without a seed treatment? This is not the time to hope. We got to know.
Yeah, and my experience has shown that you can have just as much disease in June after a rain, or you can still have insects depending upon what's going on there. So it's just like, in my opinion, it's like buying a car and saying, I'm not going to drive my car in the rain, or it's not going to rain, so don't put any paint on it. I want to save a little money and forget the paint. There's still humidity and there's still all these other things going on that can make that car rust. And I think the same thing with plants. There's stuff going on in that soil that can hurt your plant, and you never know what it's going to be. And we never get perfect planting conditions ever that I know of. Maybe one day, and then there's always at least 2 days every year, which we don't know those 2 days, you should not plant. I wish we could publish those.
It always amazes me every year we get 1 or 2 instances of a grower leaving a field for naught, and 20, 21, 27 days later, maybe the weather conditions are good enough that the field didn't completely drown out. There's still some oxygen available, but not good enough that they can go in and replant. And we'll get the phone call, it's coming up. I'm going to put the planter back away. I think everything's okay. So that's another amazing part of our seed treatment, that even if we do the stresses, if everything's not coming up within the 5-day window that you're expecting, there's a pretty long runway to be able to tolerate some stresses and be able to come out of it. Because as a farmer, we all know the last thing we ever want to do is go out and plant a second time or a third time, depending on where you're at. It's amazing. It always amazes me every year. It shouldn't, because we've got the body of work in that somewhere in our growing area, there's someone that will call and say, that seed didn't come up for 21 days, and on the 22nd day or the 27th day, stuff starts firing up out of the ground, and it's a 130 to 140,000 stand, and everything's good.
Amy, we do use robust rates. That's another thing that we didn't really talk about. In other words, to give this protection, how many days of protection would you estimate that our base products have in controlling fungi on the seed?
Well, the chemistry doesn't go away. It just gets diluted as the plant gets bigger. So if it comes up out of the ground and is growing, quote, normally, 2 to 3 weeks of protection. But if it's under the ground and hasn't come out, that chemical is still there. So you get 2 to 3 weeks after it emerged, it still has the chemistry in it. And that's why we see that too when you get crusting or cracking and the beans can get through it. And they're like, oh my goodness, these beans made it. Usually it's because that tripidity is on there with good fungicides.
Very good. Well, if we don't have anything else to say, we'll come to the part that can either be the most fun part or the part you hate, and that's my corny jokes. So here we go. Okay.
Poor Amy.
Poor Amy. We're sorry about this. My first one is a little factoid. You should know. Do you know that you do not need a parachute to go skydiving? Did you know that? You need a parachute to go skydiving twice. Okay, think about that. Okay. As you get older, you worry about this. I know I think about it all the time a little bit, and during my visit to the doctor, I asked the doctor, how do you determine if an older person should go to a care home? He replied, well, we fill a bathtub up with water and then offer the individual a teaspoon, a teacup, and a bucket and ask him to empty the tub. And I said, oh, I get it. A normal person would use the bucket. It's bigger. It could be a lot easier job, And the doctor looked at me and said, no, a normal person would pull the plug. Would you like a bed near the window? So there you go. Couple more here. This is for the ladies. I always like to have one for the ladies. How do you keep your husband from reading your email? You rename the folder to instruction manual. Instruction manual. Okay. And the last one is for you active people. Running is a great way to meet new people. Today I met 2 EMTs, 3 nurses, and a cardiologist. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Anyhow.
Brought your A game today, Joe.
Well, Amy, we really sincerely appreciate the opportunity to work with you and the Rosen Company, and Kevin Fall, your partner in crime, you might say. He's a tremendous asset to us also, and we can't thank you enough. And we look forward to every year we sit down with Amy and say, okay, well, how can we do it better? And we're looking forward to that meeting very shortly. And so we can get ready for next year. But again, thank you. And for all of you, we hope that your family is safe and you're healthy, and we'll see you next week.